All right, this is Josh Olson, Administrator of Battlefront Apologetics Christian Defense Ministries. And I have on the phone with me Benjamin Duncan. He's an atheist out of northern Michigan. And this is really a part 2 discussion. And what we're going to do is a little bit of an overview of our last discussion and just try to pick up where we left off and hopefully wrap up the last topic that we were discussing, and then move along to a different topic. So what I'm going to do is just kind of reintroduce my argument. And my argument is that Christianity is true by virtue of the impossibility of the contrary. I'm arguing specifically for Christian theism and not theism in general. The foundation for my worldview and thus my argument is the revealed Word of God, the Bible. Without God, knowledge is impossible. God is a necessary precondition for knowledge, as only the biblical worldview provides the preconditions of intelligibility. God cannot be reasoned to, but rather God is the precondition for reason itself. Thus, the very ability to reason is proof of my worldview, and in fact, Benjamin's ability to reason presupposes the truth of my worldview. To know anything at all, you must have one of two things. You must either have infinite knowledge, lest something you don't know contradicts what you claim to know, or you must have revelation from someone who does have infinite knowledge. You do not have infinite knowledge, but you do know things with certainty. Thus, your knowledge is a result of God's revelation, and you are therefore without excuse for denying Him. All right, so and then I want to cover some definitions, just to get those out of the way. A worldview is a network of your most basic presuppositions by which all experience is interpreted, and a presupposition is an a priori belief that must be assumed before any obtainment of knowledge can occur. So, Benjamin, last time we spoke, I asked you about whether or not you could be wrong about everything that you claim to know.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that, you most certainly could be wrong about everything that you claim to know. But you do know things on an operative level. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that again?
Well, I don't know, obviously I don't know, you can't know for absolute certainty whether you exist or something like that, but absolute certainty is not the level that people usually operate under. You operate under what is an operational certainty, which means that you know enough so that you can be certain enough so that it bears into the reality or whatever you're doing.
In our last discussion, you said that that you're able to come to a knowledge of things through your senses, and your justification for your senses was that you can presume them as being reliable because there hasn't been an indication to you that you couldn't rely on them. There's nothing that suggests that they're not reliable, so therefore they are.
Which is a principle of reason. There has to be something to suggest that a contrary idea is true to try to ponder whether or not it is true. That's a principle of reason. It's unreasonable to propose every single possibility to any matter, because there's an infinite number of possibilities that could be contrary to the idea that my senses are true. Just infinite. You could just sit here and just make them up all day long. But that would require an imaginative approach.
Well, so we just kind of restate your position here, that you presume the reliability of your senses because there's nothing that suggests the contrary. And this is kind of what's called an appeal to ignorance, which means by the same reasoning I could say that God exists because he can't be proven not to, or God exists because I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary. And any objection to my using this reasoning, which is the same reasoning you're using to justify your senses, would be to commit the double standard fallacy.
Okay, but there's nothing that suggests that there's a God. Nothing. I don't think it is a parallel. What's that?
Well, there's nothing that suggests to you that there's a God.
But you're in a discussion. I understand that's how you come to your reasoning. But in a discussion, you have to deal with what's empirical. You have to deal with what you can convince other people about.
Okay, now in regards to, you use the word empirical there. Do you take the position that all knowledge is attained through the senses?
No. It is, well, you obtain knowledge also cognitively. Simply through thinking about things. I would say that useful evidence is obtained through the senses, but knowledge contains more than just evidence. And there's more than one. And although I would say that the scientific approach, the scientific method, is the best method we've devised at coming to reasoning, because it rules out certain things like preconditional biases. That's the purpose of it. It rules out preconditional biases. It rules out things like availability heuristics and all the other heuristics that human beings are capable of doing, or that they're susceptible to. And that's the reason we have a scientific method.
Okay, one of the disagreements that we had in our last discussion is that I hold to the position that the reliability of senses is actually, it is something that must be presupposed, which is an a priori belief that you must have before any knowledge can be obtained or any investigation could occur. And you argued that the reliability of senses is not a presupposition.
No, it contains a presupposition. You could say that it has that element to it, but it doesn't rely upon one. Babies don't have a presupposition as to whether they're reliable. The matter is up in the air for them when they come out of the womb. They don't have any thoughts on the matter, but they arrive at that conclusion. I don't remember any parent taking me aside and saying, "You know what, Benji, your senses are reliable." I've never heard anyone say that to me.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would say that it's true that in regards to babies and stuff, they don't have the presupposition that the senses are reliable. In light of my worldview, you could justify the fact that your senses would be reliable since they are the result of an intelligent, creative act. So you could say that they're reliable, whether you make that presupposition or not.
You can reach the conclusion if you have an agnostic presupposition on the matter. I'm not denying that presupposition is involved. What I'm saying, though, is that an agnostic presupposition can still come to the conclusion. You would have to have a Gnostic presupposition about the fact that the idea that they're untrue to reach the conclusion that they're not true. So it's not an issue of whether you have a presupposition. It's an issue of your methodology. I mean, let's go to a case in point, okay? The Bible. The two genealogies between Luke and Matthew don't match. I say they don't match. They're contradictions. Okay? The only way that you can come to the conclusion that they're not contradictions is if you presuppose that the Bible's true. The one story that apologists always will say is that one of the two genealogies is talking about Joseph's stepfather, saying that either Heli or Jacob is Joseph's stepfather. And another story they come up with is saying that that one of the two genealogies, take your pick, is really talking about the bloodline to Mary instead of Joseph. to come to either of those conclusions, you have to literally add a footnote to it. You can't come to that conclusion with an agnostic presupposition about whether they're true or not. One says
Right.
Joseph, son of Heli. The other one says Jacob, father of Joseph. That's a contradiction.
Okay, so you're kind of you're agreeing with my position that...
I'm agreeing that presuppositions are involved, but an agnostic presupposition, but we try to use a methodology at communicating your ideas or coming to your conclusions that can be done from an agnostic presupposition, from being uncertain about it. I don't think you can reach the conclusion that the Luke genealogy is talking about Mary unless you have a presupposition that it is, or that the Bible's true. You can't reach that conclusion without a presupposition.
Can you give me an example of an argument that does not involve a presupposition?
See, it depends on whether the presupposition is about whether the idea is true or not. Everything involves a presupposition, but the issue about whether, like with the example I just gave you, whether the two genealogies are contradictions or not, is a conclusion you can reach without a presupposition as to whether or not the Bible's true. You can reach a conclusion that the Luke genealogy contradicts the Matthew genealogy without a presupposition as whether it's true or not. It relies on other presuppositions, sure, like, the presupposition that the Bible's real, or that it's a book, or that you're reading it, or that it comes from the past, or that, these are presuppositions obviously you have to rely on to come to the conclusion, but they're not presuppositions that bear into the dispute as to whether it's authentic.
Now, we're talking about senses. Say that's your justification for the reliability of your senses is that there hasn't been an indication that that your senses aren't reliable. Okay, I'm still saying that's
which I think is a law of rationality. I don't think that's just something I'm using. I think that's a law of rationality.
Well, I'm calling it an appeal to ignorance because you're saying that
I don't think so.
Well, I understand that you don't think so.
It's not relatable to something like the example you gave that you're using as a parallel for that would be, I can't disprove God exists because we don't know either way.
I'm saying that
we do know something about whether my senses are true.
At least I know something about it.
Well, you think you do.
I can't communicate to you that my senses are true, right? It's not something I can prove empirically, right?
Right. No, you couldn't.
Because my senses are inside me.
Right.
But God is not inside you. God is outside of you. So it's something that I can share too, if it's true. So I don't think it's the same thing. If I can say that, well, there's a rock in my yard, and you walk in the yard, and I pick up the rock, and you say, well, I don't think my senses are reliable. I don't think that this rock's here. There's nothing I can do to convince you. You understand? And we both agree on that. But if there's nothing I can do to convince you, what's the point in trying? all discussions, all disputes, rely upon some what's called a claim in common. You have to have some claims in common to build off of. And those claims in common, you call them presuppositions if you want, but they're necessary for discussion. We have to agree that the rock's there in order to discuss what to do with the rock. Or to discuss, we have to have that agreement.
There's induction logic. That your senses are basically reliable. These things must already be presupposed to be true in order.
But you rely on that too, that your senses are somewhat reliable. That's not a claim we have out of common.
No, that isn't. But our justifications for those senses are different.
Look, there's only one thing I know of in life that can do anything and can ignore all the physical laws, and that can, has no limitations whatsoever. And that's the human imagination. The human imagination is the perfect primordial soup for a god to spring out of. I don't know anything else that compares to it. The spiritual world, the only thing that has any kind of commonality, in my experience, with the spiritual world is the human imagination.
See, but now that's an argument that's based off of your presupposition, of a naturalistic presupposition, of your atheistic presupposition. It's more or less a prejudicial conjecture.
I don't know about that, but it relies upon my experience in life. Right?
Your what in life?
My experiences in life. I live in the same world you do, and I'm telling you that I've never seen anything that suggests to me that there's a spiritual world or that there's a supernatural. And for you to make say anything convincing to me or to people like me, you got to say something more than I just know it's true. I mean, that's not going to be good enough.
Right, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to convince you or persuade you that God exists. I hold to the position that you already have this knowledge. You just don't acknowledge the knowledge, and you're.
But that's not. The Bible even contradicts that idea. I mean, the Bible says, if you profess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thine heart that God hath saved him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. Okay, where does the word "if" come in there? If everybody believes in God, it says, if you believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead. If you're saying that if the Bible is universally claiming that everybody believes in God, why would they use the word "if" there?
Well, I'm saying that everybody has enough knowledge for their condemnation. This is the reason why we share the gospel with people, because they know enough for their condemnation.
What is the rationality for not believing in God to be condemning you in some way?
The rationality for not believing.
Why would that condemn you just because you don't believe something?
Because we're commanded to believe. We're commanded to.
The idea that you're commanded to believe relies upon the idea that it relies upon the belief.
But my position is that you already have this knowledge. You have the knowledge that God exists.
That's not a claim that you can support anyway.
That is a claim that I could support, because only my position offers justification for the possibility of knowledge, where yours doesn't. I mean, you take a position that nothing can be known with 100% certainty, which you can't even know that's true with 100% certainty, and that's the folly of atheism. That's what atheism.
There's nothing. It is a basic rule of rationality that if you have nothing to suggest that an alternative is true, there's no reason to ask whether or not there are alternatives.
Okay, and then
there's nothing to suggest that Abraham Lincoln was a robot. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. If there's no absolute, we can't know anything for certain. So yeah, it's possible that Abraham Lincoln was a robot. Nothing suggests he was. So the question, is Abraham Lincoln a robot, is a worthless question.
All right, when it comes to your senses, though, and this is why I'm saying that you're making an appeal to ignorance, is because you're saying that you can presume them to be reliable because nothing has indicated to you otherwise. Okay, and I'm saying by that same reasoning, I could say that God exists, and I could say that because nothing has suggested to me otherwise.
Okay, the difference between those two things is that I have something on the scale that says that they're reliable, and you have nothing on the scale that says that God is reliable truth. All you have is a prehistoric book written 2,000 years ago by people you don't know. You never met any of these people. You don't know how honest they are or dishonest they are, and you have a bunch of experiences in your life that are very likely to be placebo effects. You sit down, you pray, and you expect to feel God's hand on your life, and hence you do. I could give you the same sort of effect if I gave you a sugar pill.
Okay, so your position is that because you actually have something.
I have something on the other scale. You don't have anything on it.
See, you're begging the question there, because you're assuming that God doesn't exist in your statement.
No, I'm saying you have nothing on the God side of the scale that you can give me. Nothing.
Oh, but I do, though.
What?
Well, the proof that God exists is that if he didn't, you couldn't prove anything at all. He is the necessary precondition for knowledge. As I said earlier, God cannot be reasoned to. He cannot be concluded with our own autonomous reasoning, okay, because the very concept of reasoning is contingent upon him. You have to start with God in order to come to a knowledge of anything at all.
I still don't understand. I mean, you're going to have to find a better way to explain that, because I just don't get it. I don't see how you have to believe that there's a God to know that there's knowledge. I don't get that at all.
Wait a second. I'm not saying that you need to profess belief in him to come to a knowledge of things.
I understand that, but why does there have to be a God to be knowledge? You're not communicating this very well. Either doesn't make much sense, or you're just not communicating it very well, because I'm not getting it.
Well, I don't expect you to get it.
Okay.
And that's the thing. All I'm trying to do is expose the fact that you are without excuse for denying it.
That's a claim. You're not arguing that in any way that I can verify it or not verify it. All you've been able to show me is that a book says that. And I'm not disputing that the book says it. I just don't see how I should rely on the book.
All right, well, we'll talk about logic for a little bit here. Okay. The laws of logic themselves must be absolute, meaning that they don't change.
They have to be absolute in that they're empirically viewable from one person to another.
Well, how do you view a law of logic?
Well, it's a behavior. So what you're talking about is when you view the behavior of a thing, then you're viewing that behavior. It's not something like a God, because God is immaterial material. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to compare, like, the law is a behavior. It's a behavior of something. And hence it's an element of abstract reality. It'd be like trying to view gravity. Can you view gravity? What does gravity look like? No. You can view gravity by throwing something up in the air and it falls down to the ground. You viewed the action. Gravity is not a thing. It's a behavior that things do. And the same thing with the laws of logic. They are behaviors that things do. This is different than God. God is an immaterial material. So it doesn't work as a parallel for God.
The point that I'm trying to get to is the fact that the laws of logic exist. You and I both have this agreement. I take the position that the laws of logic are immaterial, which you would agree to. They're conceptual by nature. You can't stub your toe on one, and you can't put one in the refrigerator. Okay, I hold to the position that they're immutable, that they do not change, that they can't change. And I also hold to the position that they're universal. They apply everywhere. My question is on your own worldview, how do you account for these laws?
Nothing suggests that they're amendable. You have to have a presupposition that they're amendable to ask the question whether they're amendable.
I agree that the laws of logic work. I agree that they're true. The question is, why are they true?
It's not a worthy question. I don't think it is, because you don't have anything to suggest that they're amendable. You have nothing to suggest that there's an alternative reality where they wouldn't be around, or that our reality could be altered in some way that they wouldn't be around.
No, and I don't hold the position that that's a possibility. But the laws of logic are a precondition of intelligibility. And your worldview has to make sense for that. It needs to justify that precondition of intelligibility in order for your worldview to be rational.
I don't think yours does either. Okay, go ahead.
The laws of logic make sense in the Christian worldview.
Go ahead.
We would expect to have laws of logic. Okay, that God is immaterial, he's universal, and he doesn't change. His character is immutable, unchanging, does not change, cannot change.
Well, that's the story.
Well, it's my justification for my worldview, based on your own worldview and your epistemology.
Could I explain that the opposite way? Could I explain That God has certain characteristics.
Can you let me finish?
Let me ask just one question. My brain's on the. Sorry. Could I explain the characteristics of God that you're trying to compare to the way the physical world works, the opposite way? Could I say that that God is conceived by a human being, by the human imagination, and humans base God upon what they physically saw, upon their own experiences, upon their own minds? Humans are similar to God because humans made up God.
Yeah, that's just simply your opinion.
But I can show you imagination. I can show you that people have imaginations. You can't show me any supernatural reality. So I have something there.
I'm not required to, because you just file it anyway.
Okay.
You hold to a naturalistic position, and everybody interprets evidence in light of what they already believe to be true. So I can't prove to you using evidences that God exists. I can't do that. It's absolutely futile. I mean, if you and I were to go to Grand Canyon and we saw layers of sediment, we were to look at fossils and all that stuff. I mean, I would say, wow, that was a result of a global flood. That you'd say, wow, that's millions of years of.
There is evidence that it's not the result of a global flood, though.
I'm not trying to discuss the flood. I'm just saying that you and I are going to come to conclusions, different conclusions based off of what we already believe when we approach the evidence. A neutral position does not exist.
A neutral position, a neutral approach can yield my outcome, can yield my conclusion. I don't think a neutral approach can yield your conclusions.
I'm saying a neutral approach does not exist. The philosophy that you ought to approach evidence without a philosophy is in fact a philosophy.
I'm not talking about the approach, I'm talking about the methodology you use to argue your position. You can use a methodology that does not have presuppositions about whether something's true or not.
Well, that in itself is a presupposition.
It's not a presupposition. It's something that it's something human beings have discovered over time. The advent of science came about because human beings finally realized at a certain point that their perception of realities were not reliable. Because human beings have heuristics, they have biases, they have all kinds of ways that they interpret data according to their availability heuristic, their prejudices, etc. We learned over a long period of time that those things aren't reliable, so we got to develop methods to get around them. That is something we learn by experience.
All right, let's talk about science for a minute here. Okay, I'm talking about the scientific method, testability, observability, repeatability. In order for that to work, you have to have that presupposition that the future is always going to reflect the past to at least some extent. Otherwise, what good is science if you're going to get a different result every time you do the same experiment in the same environment?
No, uniformity is an observable thing. I can have the precondition, the presupposition, the uniformity, not of being uncertain whether uniformity is true or not, and come to the conclusion that there's uniformity. The only way I can come to the conclusion that uniformity isn't true is if I have the presupposition that it isn't.
No, not necessarily. What I'm asking,
I don't think so. I think you've got to have some kind of creationist mentality to presume that to even ask this question in the first place.
Not really, because the science, the very ability to do science is contingent upon this presupposition.
Yeah, but it's a presupposition that's shared. It's a presupposition that's shared almost with all people.
Yeah, everyone has this presupposition. My question is how do you justify it?
You want me to justify it in an abstract, conversational way?
I want you
to justify it using terminology and rhetoric?
I want to know how you justify that presupposition from within the framework of your worldview. It's a very simple question.
You want me to do it with rhetoric? You're asking me to. It's like asking me to describe the color blue.
No.
Without another color. Yes, you are.
Well, this is the problem that you're going to have with answering this question from within the framework of your own worldview, is that you already have to assume uniformity in order to justify uniformity. You have to say the future is always going to reflect the past to at least some extent because it always has.
It always has in the observable time that we've been alive.
Right, and that is circular reasoning.
No, I'm not. I am saying that there's something to suggest uniformity, and there's nothing to suggest that uniformity isn't true. You're still ignoring the rational law that there has to be something on the other side of the tipping scale to make the question worthy of being asked. Go.
Which is an appeal to ignorance.
No, it's not.
It's an appeal to ignorance. If I say
God is an appeal to ignorance because there's nothing on either side of the tipping scale there.
See, you're begging the question because all evidence is already interpreted in light of what you believe to be the case beforehand.
You keep saying that, but I can argue it from a methodology that doesn't rely upon that. And I don't think creationist arguments or apologist arguments rely upon that. They rely upon a presupposition, as in the methodology. I can have a presupposition, but not use it as a form of my methodology, presenting my arguments. It's like I just said with the two genealogies. Can I reach the conclusion that the two genealogies are not contradictions without using a presupposition that the Bible's true? Is it possible that uniformitarianism isn't true? Yes, it's possible, but nothing suggests it isn't.
There's nothing to suggest that it is. I mean, if you want to talk about uniformitarianism, it's a philosophical position that is based off of assumption. It's all that you can't prove uniformitarianism.
I can prove it within my own lifetime.
All right, so you
take
it.
Can I prove it in the long term? No, but nothing suggests in the long term it didn't hold true. We can prove in our own lifetime that radioactive chemicals have a certain decaying rate in our own lifetime. But for the question to even be asked at one time did they decay at this certain rate? You have to at least have something on that side of the scale for the question to be asked in the first place. And we can't imagine what the heck would change the radioactive decay in things. So it's not even within our imagination. We can't. The alternative conclusion can't even be imagined.
Would you like to get back to the laws of logic real quick? Because we didn't really get to finish.
Well, let me just let you talk about it for a while so I can understand what the heck you're trying to get to.
All right, so just to recap a little bit, all right, my position is that the laws of logic are a justifiable presupposition in light of the Christian worldview because they're immaterial, universal, unchanging. They reflect the thinking of God, and we know this through special revelation, and we know this innately because we are also made in His image. Okay, so my question to you is, how do you account for these laws from within the framework of your worldview? How do you account for immaterial, universal, unchanging laws from within the framework of your worldview? Because you would already agree that before any minds existed, that the universe could not exist and exist at the same time in the same way. So it's not something that we've invented, and you agree to that as well. It's not something that man invented. We didn't invent these laws. We recognize them and we put names to them, and our understanding of them may change, but the laws themselves don't change.
Okay.
You know, my justification is that they reflect the thinking of God. It would make sense in the Christian worldview that we would have the laws of logic, that we'd have an absolute standard for reason.
Then why does He break them all the time?
Well, He doesn't break them. I'd
sure
like
he
to know.
does. He breaks all the physical laws of nature. He's a living thing without cells. How does that happen?
The physical laws are not logical laws.
They're based on logical laws. He's a physical living thing that can think, and he does not come from a planet. You need oxygen to have cells. But he pre-exists planets. How does that happen?
I don't know.
That's a defiance of every freaking physical law we know.
I see. We would call the laws of nature the way in which God upholds the universe.
If you don't know the answer to that question, you're not really giving me an explanation. You're telling me that only your biblical worldview explains these things. Giving the answer of God is no more specific than just saying nature. Because you can't tell me how he did it.
Well, I'm not required to tell you how he did it.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. To argue things as specifically as you're asking me to argue them, you have to tell me how he did it.
Well, I don't know how he did it. It doesn't, just because.
Then you're not. Then it's not explainable within your worldview. Just saying God is not an explanation.
No, I'm not just saying God. I'm saying that, okay, you take the Bible, okay, if you presuppose the Bible to be true, I mean, you stand on that as the ultimate standard for your worldview, it makes sense of all the things that we take for granted.
But the Bible's not true, though. I can prove the Bible's not true.
By using the laws of logic that you can't account for?
No, I can prove it from a standpoint of being unsure as to whether it's true or not. You can't argue it from a standpoint of uncertainty on the matter.
Okay, but according to you, you
can
only argue about anything.
Only argue it from your presupposition. You cannot argue it from a neutral standpoint.
Right, that's my point. Yes,
No, you can't. I can. I can argue that the Bible's not true from a neutral standpoint. I'm saying you can't.
There is no neutral position.
You can.
You've already taken a position.
You can give an argument from a neutral position, though.
That's not even possible.
You can establish an argument, though, that does not rely upon a presupposition.
That in itself is a presupposition.
No, it isn't. It doesn't rely upon any presuppositions that a person who disagrees would disagree with. It's like I'm talking, like I keep bringing up the issue with the genealogies. Me saying that they're contradict each other is not a presupposition. It does not rely upon any presuppositions that a person who would disagree with me wouldn't share. I mean, I keep bringing up the example because I'm waiting for a response on it. One says Joseph is the son of Heli. One says that Joseph's the son of Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an argument? Can you give me an argument? That is a neutral. That is a totally neutral observation. It does not rely upon me to have a presupposition that the Bible is untrue.
Well, that would be a good topic for a Bible study. Okay.
But the Bible relates to this.
Yeah, it does.
As does science. It relates to this just as much as science.
Okay, but I'm wanting to know how you can justify the possibility of knowledge from within the framework of your worldview, and I don't think I've gotten an answer to that question yet.
Okay, you're talking about are you meaning just the human perception of knowledge?
No, I'm talking about knowledge. I'm talking about the ability to actually know things. In our last discussion, I asked you if you could be wrong about everything that you claim to know,
mm-hmm.
and you said yes.
And you didn't like my answer. It didn't make it a bad answer.
No, it was the answer that I expected. You could be wrong about everything you claim to know. I expected you to say yes to that question. Okay. But then in the same conversation, you turn around and say, well, I can have certainty on an operational level.
I can have certainty on an operational level, and there's nothing on the tipping scale that suggests that my conclusions are untrue.
Be wrong about all of that. Be wrong about all of that. Remember we spoke last time, and I said, well, if I said that my house was 50 feet tall, but I could be wrong, is that a valid knowledge claim? And you said, no, that's not a valid knowledge claim. So if you could be wrong about everything that you claim to know, none of your claims are valid. They're not valid knowledge claims. That they're prejudicial conjectures or mere opinion.
No, they're not, because I have to have something on the opposite side of the scale. You're missing a crucial element of reasoning. Not every single conclusion requires absolute certainty.
Are you absolutely certain of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you do have.
That conclusion does not require me to have absolute certainty. Not every conclusion requires it.
And that's something that you're absolutely certain of.
No, I'm not absolutely certain of it. I'm operationally certain of that.
You're holding that position that you can be wrong about everything that you claim to know.
Based upon my limitations as a human.
You don't even know for certain that your position as an atheist is rational. It's that
I'm
not valid.
Using the operational certainties that are available to me, yeah, it's rational.
Okay, but your operational certainties are contingent upon your senses, by which you justify by field ignorance. That's my point, dude. That is my point.
Central argument. This is your central argument, the way I'm seeing it here. Okay? Let me tell you how I'm interpreting this. You're taking every single thing that we rely. You're saying that everything we rely upon to judge whether something is true, or not, relies upon our presuppositions, and hence we can question those presuppositions. Hence, we can question them, and I can insert supernaturalism into the world because we can't be certain about everything.
No.
I don't see any room, even with what we're talking about, that supernaturalism can be inserted into things.
Well, I'm not saying.
If you're not trying to argue whether supernaturalism is true, I don't see where the relevance is.
No, are you saying that I'm kind of doing like a God of the gaps type argument?
No, you're trying to make everything seem as though we can't be certain about anything, so we can just insert supernaturalism. That's kind of a God of the gaps, but
no, that's not my argument at all, dude. So I mean, maybe I'm not conveying it to you the way, clearly enough for you to understand it. That's not what I'm not saying that we don't know things for certain, therefore God exists or anything like that. That is not my argument. My argument is that in order to have knowledge about anything, God is the precondition for that, which means that you can't.
There are more than one kind of knowledge, though. There's knowledge. There's concrete knowledge and there's abstract knowledge, right? The laws of logic are an abstract knowledge, right? They require abstract reasoning to understand it, right? Okay. Now here's the part. I'm going to explain to you the piece of puzzle you're missing in this whole thing. Why you don't think Darwinism explains all that? Because Darwinism is not the whole story. Darwinism stops at the feral, at the end point between ape and human, biologically, is feral man. We are not feral humans.
Here, let's talk about your evolutionary.
Right. Okay. I'm talking about it right now. We are not feral humans. Are we feral humans?
I don't even know what that means, dude.
Feral wouldn't. Okay. Let's say that we were stripped of all culture. We were stripped of anyone teaching us anything. We didn't have language. Would we be able to think on the level that we do? And you know what we already know the answer to this because, well, at least on an operational level, because we found feral children who, for some reason or another, were raised without parents, or at least a speaking relative who was able to teach the kid language. And without language, a human is really not that much more advanced than an animal. Walk around on all fours, eats grass. He's scared of other people. He shouts at things. He doesn't. And what happens is that over time, when these children are found, feral children, they're always diagnosed as being mentally retarded, severely mentally handicapped, because they can't even operate on a level any higher than an animal. But the magical thing that happens is that when we teach children how to speak, these feral children, it's just like you inserted what you would call a soul into them. They suddenly, they're because you need language to codify the world around you in abstract concepts. Now the Darwinian explanation for this is that we developed this codification as a tool over time. When you drop feral man onto the planet, he is not any more than advanced than a chimp. Not much more, anyway. Not enough to account for the severe differences in our ability, and our reasoning, our logistics. You need symbolic interaction to have that. And symbolic interaction has been developed by human beings from generation to generation. It's cultural. We pass it on to our children.
You're not saying that atheism is true or that God doesn't exist for any rational reason, but only because it is necessary for you to say that as a result of what's going on with your brain.
The mystery I'm trying to uncover is why my explanation never seems good enough for you. Why is the explanation that I can know things on an operational level, or the explanation that there's nothing on the other side to contradict them, making them?
Because on your own epistemology, you can't even know that you know things on an operational level, and that's my point.
But I can know them enough so that I can share them with other people.
Do you know that for certain?
Because you have common experiences than I do on certain levels.
I know that on your own world.
I'm sharing them with you right now.
When you make knowledge claims, you're presupposing my worldview.
I don't think so.
I understand.
I'm making operative knowledge claims. I'm making knowledge claims on an operational level.
And you have no justification for those.
And your worldview, and we haven't even discussed the problems with your worldview. We're only talking about mine, which makes a heck of a lot more sense than yours. When you really break it down, I have not said one single thing breaking down the problems with Christianity as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it'd be great if you did that, but...
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that. What's that?
I said we first have to establish...
I can break it down using Christian assumptions, because they're incoherent.
You're going to let me speak here, man. I'm just saying we first have to establish that your worldview offers you a cogent justification for making rational claims. Okay, and you haven't been able to do that. I mean, you've made appeals to ignorance many times. You deny this, that's fine.
I haven't denied it. I've argued how I haven't.
Well, you're denying. I said that you made an appeal to...
I've offered you an argument which you weren't able to respond to.
Okay, what was the argument again? Are you talking about
that my claims aren't an appeal to ignorance is because there's nothing on the tipping scale the other side to suggest that my claims aren't true. That isn't an appeal to ignorance.
That's an appeal to ignorance.
Ignorance is if there were nothing on either side. And I just went with one way because I liked it. Well, why don't we just jump into all the ways that God doesn't make any sense?
We could do that, but you'd have to first offer me...
We'll just get into them, and then you could explain how it don't work.
Well, you have to offer me a foundation by which you make your assertions, by which you...
I'm making my assumptions on similar foundations that you are.
Okay, which are?
Well, you'll know that when I get to the examples.
Are you using...
How goes in the Christian worldview is God not to blame for every bad thing that happens? Every single bad thing.
Okay. Are you saying that evil exists?
God made evil.
Okay, does evil exist?
Yep.
Okay, does it objectively exist? Is evil absolute?
It requires a perception that it's evil, yeah. But I'm talking about from your worldview. I'm trying to see if your worldview makes sense of it.
Well, if you're making the presupposition or the presumption that evil exists, absolutely, that moral absolutes do exist, then I want to know how you justify that presupposition from within your worldview.
I asked you the question. I'll get to that after you answer my question. I'm asking you how God is not to blame for every bad thing that happens. God made man. God made the devil. According to the Christian worldview, He gave us the tendencies that we have. So how can He judge us?
See, this is the point that I'm trying to get to. In order for you to assert that bad things happen, you have to have an objective standard by which you make that assertion. If you don't have an objective standard by which you make that assertion, you're merely begging the question.
You're saying God doesn't have an objective standard, though.
I'm not saying that He doesn't have an objective standard. I'm saying He is the standard.
It's ridiculous. He's still a being. He still has opinions. His opinions don't become facts just because he's a spirit. And the Bible gets every single simple moral question wrong. Every simple one.
Okay, how do you know that? What's your standard for morality?
It falls by your standard too.
Okay, what's my standard for morality?
Well, do you believe in rape?
What was that?
Do you believe in rape?
Do I believe in rape?
Do you believe rape is justifiable?
No. No, it's not justified.
So you think if a person rapes somebody, that the woman should have to marry a rapist?
No.
So by your standard, the Bible is not true. Is a flawed on the moral way, because the Bible says that.
No, the Bible that you're talking about, Old Covenant law.
Who gives a crap? It was written by an omniscient being. It was written by the same omniscient being that your claim is the source of morality, and he is an omnibenevolent being, and he wrote that if a woman is raped, that she should have to marry her rapist.
Right, you're talking about Old Covenant stuff. You're talking about Levitical laws. You're talking about things that were written and applied to a particular group of people at a particular time in history, for a particular reason. These things don't apply to Christians. They don't apply to us now. We live under the New Covenant.
How could even saying that a woman should have to marry her rapist even work for the Jews? You're claiming that there are moral absolutes, and you're saying that, and then you're saying that some things only work for the Jews and not for everybody else.
I'm saying that there was particular laws written for the Jews for a particular time, for a particular reason.
So they're not absolutes.
You know, these were meant to be temporary laws. They're not exactly moral laws. These are not necessarily moral laws.
Where does it say that in the Bible?
And I'm not going to say that we need to know the morally right thing to do in every circumstance.
Where does it say that in the Bible?
The question is, do moral absolutes exist or not? Because if they do not exist, then every time you make a moral claim, you are left with arguing nothing more than your opinion, which is inherently arbitrary, or your preference.
Morality does not, I'm trying to answer your question, sir. Morality does not apply to things like, to every single code of conduct. It has to follow at least the golden rule to some extent to be qualified as morality. And we get that from, we get the appeal to empathy from our animalian past. It's sociobiological.
Right, I could agree that there are some biological aspects in relation to morality. I could agree with that. It doesn't necessarily mean they evolved.
But your central argument here is that I can't explain them, and I just did.
No, I'm saying that from within the framework of your worldview, you can't make sense of morality.
Sure I did. It's a combination between empathy and reason.
Yeah, but you can't account for any of those things. You know, how do you know that empathy is good? How do you know that?
By using empathy and reason.
Why don't we just invoke the feeling of pain and call that good?
But we don't call it good. Our senses, our brains do not read them as good. You can't be taught for your brain to read it as good.
Here's the point. If we are nothing more than biological bags of stuff, we're carbon-based life forms made of mostly water, what does it matter?
But we are more than that. We are more than that. Just because that is what we are doesn't mean that is... No, it isn't. That is a straw man.
We're matter...
I have never made that claim that is all we are. That is what we are, but it's not all we are.
We're matter in motion in all of our thought processes.
According to your worldview, we're scum who all deserve to die. According to my worldview, we made morality. So in which worldview are human beings elevated?
So if we made morality, then morality is largely opinion-based.
How come us making it diminishes it? Then if a spirit made it?
Because there's no objective standard.
Humans made civilization, too, and civilization is great.
I'm not saying that God made morality. I'm saying that morality is a reflection of his character.
But you're making up the character, too.
Oh, I'm standing on the Bible as my worldview is the revealed Word of God. I presuppose that to be true. I know that you don't.
How is that not circular reasoning?